So why is it that it takes often experiencing these world-changing, life-shattering, altering moments where we finally wake up and see? I read all the time interviews and research about people both at the end of their lives, looking back and recounting how they wish they would have lived differently. And then also those like many of us in the church militant who have been left behind by those we love so much, also wishing that we had spent time, at least with those few, differently. If I had only had one more conversation, one more trip, if I had said that one thing that I was holding back because I was afraid or angry or didn't want to create a dust-up. Why is it that in every generation, I'd imagine since the beginning of time, we struggle with these tensions at the threshold, at the gate between what was and what is to come? Even every generation, even those in the church, face a moment where we have to, in light of these new realities or attention to what would be possible, we have to decide who we together will be. Not as we were, and not as we wish in some far-reaching future to be, but to get clear on who we are and will be right now in this moment, even with all of the barriers and the byways open that allow us to be who we are and step forward or back, even when the numbers don't add up, even when energy might feel thin, even when the next faithful step is harder, seemingly, than the last one. We are called to discern and decide how these sensibilities within us will actually rise up to different action, different living in the days to come. I don't say all of this in a word of despair or shame even. It is a word of hope and a reminder, because these are the moments often where we turn and we see and we recognize and we now understand where God does often God's best work. When we stop pretending everything's fine and start telling the truth about what's broken in our lives and in our life together. It's in those places where grace often begins to move. Over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about stewardship. And yes, we'll be looking a little bit at finance and budgets and thinking about how faith meets life in those commitments. But I think it's beautiful that we're starting this conversation on this day, because those are just the smaller realities of the larger conversation we're having and have always had about legacy, the story of our giving, of our collective choices, and our courage that we are writing for the next generation. And often, because this is what it is to be human, we often, if not always, have some chasm between who we say we are and how we actually live. So we're going to be speaking a little bit into that echoing chasm, asking what it might be calling of us. One thing I'm mindful of, maybe you are too, as we, particularly some of you in this room, we have traveled and journeyed together through the ups and downs and turns of grief, where we have stood in the graveyard and in the columbarium and in this holy space at your countertops, talking about what has changed. All Saints Sunday, this moment, isn't just about remembering those people that we have loved and lost, but it's about joining them. One body across time, one people bound by grace. Jesus calls us again today into that partnership. So this parable that Jesus tells and that Steve read for us is never one that I've really considered for All Saints Day before, but I do think that it has something to speak to us, particularly offering a question for us to live. Again, Jesus uses a story of Lazarus, and that might call to mind for people, as Elise said, the one who died and rose again, a familiar name. In the story, he sits at the rich man's gate, as the text says. And gates often were in towns and cities and communities important buildings in Israel. They were surrounded by walls that were meant to keep intruders out, to kind of separate the riffraff from the good ones of us, as if the binaries that we often convince ourselves in life are true, actually are. But gates were the places where all these walls, the thick separations and divisions and chasms between one person or community and another were permeable. These gates were points, thresholds where entrance could be gained or denied. Gates hold a deep spiritual significance in the Bible. And in this parable, God's help is at the gate. The help is in the form of a human being, one that the rich man, at least in the story, often ignored or was at least willfully blind to. And again, this person is not meant to be vilified, but actually made to be accessible to your experience and my experience. And just like we often do, this rich man was going about life not having woken up until it was almost too late to begin to take that gate that was meant to be a barrier in his life and turn it into a bridge. Our place in this parable can be found because even though this rich man discovered the bridge just a click too late to begin to help others see and understand what he now saw and understood for his life and for his thriving, our place in this parable can be seen as the ones who were alive back at home, perhaps unaware or ignorant, or maybe just too busy in the serious nature of their predicament to see opportunities to live or extend themselves or deepen their commitment and communion with others in a different way. Find ourselves facing this question mark in the story, listening to the one who was to come back from the dead, the one who is the very symbol of our God being one that makes a way, even though in all of our conceived notions of what is possible in the church and in our individual lives, the one that looks at our no way helps to find a way to build a bridge wherever it is needed. If only we would be open to being co-laborers rather than critics to that work that God is already about and doing before us on behalf of us. I wonder, for those who maybe have a person who is already in your heart that you have been holding over these minutes we have shared together in worship, maybe that person was a prophet in your life, or at least a teacher, a love sharer, and one that continues to be a source of encouragement across the divide because of the witness of your shared story. Will we hear those voices of those named in our hearts calling to us on behalf of God with what they see in the big picture and in their healed state, reminding us, asking us to come closer to see what is really crucial and important? And when we hear that call, will we act? Think about a story of a city in Kentucky that was very simply struggling in the Great Depression, and there wasn't much hope left. The town was separated in two sides, and there was a bridge in the midst of the war that was destroyed, and there was a fight and a tension as to who was responsible for building it again. They still called themselves the City of Hope, a city that was just divided by one waterway. But hope became divided, and no one really found themselves in a place where they believed it was their work as co-laborers to do on the behalf of others. One weekend, there was a group of students and a teacher who came showing up with scraps of lumber and rusty nails saying, well, if nobody's going to do it, why not us? It was clumsy work. Obviously, these young ones had no idea what they were doing, but for the ones that were aged and older than they were, the ones that they looked up to, and for the life that they hoped for, they did what they could together with shaky hands, keeping at it until the grown-ups finally showed up. And then the mothers brought sandwiches, and a local preacher began to pray over the work. And by the end of the month, the bridge stood again, not perfect, but strong enough to cross. And though all that time had passed, it was at the perfect moment. When the first wagon rolled over, both sides of the town cheered, and the newspaper headline read, "The Bridge That Saved Hope." But what was really saved wasn't wood or steel. It was trust. It was a sense of covenant, communion, and life together. It was the reminder that they still belonged to one another. If we're honest, friends, it's easy for us to maybe see ourselves in this story where our weariness or even a posture of skepticism or criticism could make us people of the barrier rather than the bridge, to posture ourselves as gatekeepers rather than ones that are meant to make the connections to allow everyone to cross over. I believe that it's time for us to listen again, and these kinds of sacred days that we share are the perfect times to listen again to God's call to deeper spiritual maturity and to become a community that seeks depth over quick fixes, covenant over comfort or cutting our losses when a leader fails us or things don't go our way. If we want to honor those we light these candles for today, we do it not by nostalgia, but by continuation. Some of you received a block when you came in, and any of the kids looking at it saying, "Oh, it's Jenga. Are we going to play Jenga in church today?" Not quite. Although there is maybe a lesson in that question too. I look at this wooden block and I'm reminded of this tension between gatekeeping and bridge building. Think about how this could even be a point of prayer for us over these next weeks as we think about what it means to repair the breach in our church, in our lives, and in the world, wherever it can be found. Because this wooden block or plank could be a source of barrier or creating an obstacle for ourselves to be open to something new or to be committed again or to allow someone else to enter in with a word of encouragement or challenge. This is a break in relationship. And yet, too, it can be easily turned into a plank that on short distances can be laid to lead others to walk across whatever might divide us. Or, just like a Jenga game, we can find ourselves having to band together with others to put these blocks together piece by piece to create a road toward what may be coming, the road toward hope in what we need, the road toward what is possible when we allow ourselves to have that bridge building posture that gives God glory and makes our saints triumphant proud. How will you begin this day to be a bridge builder? I want to encourage you today and in the days to come to just sometimes hold this when you're in prayer, or even when you're in the car or another place where you have a moment to turn your attention to something deeper than the goings and comings of your life as it stands. And even write on the block as you think of ways that God might be calling you to live differently or generously as your attention is open. I know on mine I am going to write financial generosity, but too, I'm going to write things like love my people extravagantly in this next year and tell the truth as a leader even when it's hard. There might be other things that I think of and you think of, but I want this to be a point of prayer for you and a reminder of maybe the ways that God is calling and emerging in your heart and your life to perhaps step toward action, bridging the chasm between who we say we are and how we actually live. The tools are in our hands, friends. Will you be a gatekeeper or a bridge builder? In the name of God, who was and is to come, amen.